present a term to competitors. Algiers, the 28th of December 1950. Reception at the Palais d'Été, in honor of the competitors in the Mediterranean Cape Town car race, 16,000 kilometers of Africa, in 40 stages to be completed in 50 days. The Palais d'Été is located on the outskirts of Algiers, in a beautiful scenic location in the middle of a lush garden traversed by wide avenues covered with fine gravel. It is reminiscent of Villa Floridiana, in Naples, here too, panoramic balconies from which one looks out over the sea, while the cool winter wind blows in. The palace is white, Arab Moorish in style, with the vaguely residential air that all such buildings have. They are welcomed by the Friends of the Sahara, the same ones who together with the Automobile Club of Algiers organized the race. The Friends of the Sahara here take the form of colonels and generals on duty or retired, handsome gentlemen with white moustaches and little rosettes of the Legion of Honor in their buttonholes. The guests arrive at the gates of the Palais d'Été with their strange cars and trucks equipped to race in the desert and on the tracks of Central Africa. Strange French, Italian, American, German cars, strange-looking cars with mysterious contraptions on display. Almost all of them very tall bridges, a bit awkward. And some with hammocks dangling inside, others with mosquito nets on the windows, or with lights of all shapes and sizes that can be maneuvered from the inside, so reminiscent of Professor Beebe's diving machine or at least the submarine of that inventor from Lecco, Vicenna. All of them, to some extent, look like ancient war machines, the kind you see depicted in elementary texts of Latin and ancient history or in Leonardo's plates. Some even have wheels so squat and rough that they bring to mind the more usual images of the Carroccio. Half-covered skies, occasional wisps of iridescent, pearly drops rain down. They do honors at the gates of the park, flanked by platoons of gigantic spy in large uniforms, sea blue trousers, carmine jackets, heavy black or white or variously colored or golden coats. Other spy are on horseback, on white-robed horses that lightly caravan. The spy have unsheathed scimitars, the bright white of their stinging eyes standing out against their dark skin. They are imposing men, they have something of a terrible harem guardian about them, and as you pass within an inch of their raised weapons, you think that we are infidels to them, that they might take a swipe at us while we drink champagne and tumble our bleeding heads on the precious majolica floor tiles. Those who, like me, are unaccustomed to parades of this exotic kind, feel on the back of their necks the looming of unsheathed blades held high, motionless and cold. That nothing ever happened? That there is absolutely no danger? One mentally wonders. Every now and then one feels the need to turn around, though. I learn of a little fact that happened a few minutes ago. A competitor, seeing the lineup of spy on the presenter arm at the park gate, had been so overcome with awe that he had been tempted to look for a less solemnly guarded entrance and a way in that would not bring him, the obviously timid one, up to the level of an army general in the act of reviewing troops. Searching and searching, he had found a semi-open secondary gate, but just as he was about to sneak in, a spy had leapt from a half-hidden sentry box and grabbed him by the neck. The misunderstanding was later cleared up, but not without emotion on the part of the injured man. The Trans-African vehicles arrive one after the other, their big tires screeching on the wet gravel of the boulevards. Among the first are two young Egyptians. Their surnames are both Shucha, perhaps they are cousins or brothers. Their jeep bears on the front of the radiator, extending it like a waiter would extend a tray, an empty sheet metal box. Pipes and tubes come and go. The Egyptians explain that the steam produced by the radiator must enter the sheet metal box, then cool, and turn back into water that can be used for the radiator. It will be fine, as Egyptians should understand Africa. Shortly afterwards, Mrs. Get's team arrived in a large ochre yellow truck. Mrs. Gutser, the wife of the Director General du Budget of France, will only make the journey out of the race to film. She is blonde, full of animation. She says she has in her truck 30,000 meters of blank film, 7 cameras, a fleet of lamps, several diesel engines generating electricity, a couple of quintals of chemical torches. About 100 of these torches had already made their rehearsal late last night, in the garden in front of Hotel A, where the ochre-colored lorry was being loaded and, at the same time, film was being filmed. Torches were sending out ghostly flashes and flashes of sparks, 2 cameras were buzzing excitedly. Exciting for me, I say, because the whirring of the cameras gives me an uncontrollable thrill, the same thrill that years ago used to rise in me in the newspaper printing works, because of the smell of lead. Mrs. Gutser, who last night wore an American-made olive jumpsuit with large iron buckles at the braces, is now dressed in white silk, like an ordinary lady at a bourgeois reception. Thus attired, Mrs. Gutser poses in front of the nose of her truck, smiling. We may see her photograph in Algerian newspapers tomorrow, and many readers will wonder about the strange contraption looming in front of the truck's radiator. There is, in fact, a kind of iron seat supported by 2 metal beams, something like a circus contraption with its good straps and buckles to ensure that whoever sits on it does not tumble underneath. Along the way, Mrs. Gutser or some of her cameramen should sit on the seat and film. After Mrs. Gutser and her retinue had disappeared under the Moorish entrance arch, Baron Roberto Baracco from Crotone and his mechanic Gioacchino Quaranta, known as Sixillo, from Catanzaro arrived. Baron Baracco is a gigantic, blonde, mild-looking young man with very clear eyes, of the type that is usually called Norman in southern Italy. Sixillo is small, shrunken, brown. Both Baracco and Quaranta rarely open their mouths, they just watch and observe. Baracco arrived here about 10 days ago in a standard production car, a silver Aprilia, without a single scratch or dent. "What special equipment are you talking about?" he said. "Everything will work out as we go along, we'll buy what we need little by little." He did not actually say anything about this, taciturn as he is, but he let it be clearly understood. He then went on to buy the essentials not to get stuck in the desert, i.e. planks and poles and metal nets and extra tanks, as well as those spare parts that the race regulations list as mandatory for competitors. But no special equipment, his is a normal production car and must remain so. Mechanic Quaranta says that he will remove the mudguards as late as possible, perhaps after the desert, then he will wrap them up and only put them back on the eve of arriving in Cape Town. Roberto Baracco is taking part in the race not only for love of Africa and sport, but also because in a certain place on the continent, which I will not name, he found himself a prisoner of war for a few years. A guy lived near that camp who enjoyed insulting him and throwing terrifying buckets of ice water at him. He was asleep. Big and strong as he is, Roberto Baracco has wrists as powerful as Reykjavik and fists capable of twisting an elephant trunk like a twig. Well, he says he'll want to find that guy and give him his business, multiplied. In Africa Roberto Baracco also came for this, with the bitter memory of that guy who threw buckets of ice water at him, with this account of him to settle face to face. After Baracco and Sixillo Quaranta, 7 French military vehicles pass through the entrance gates, one after the other, 3 jeeps and 3 trucks. The 7th is a workshop truck that will have the task of assisting the 6 cars during the route. All 7 cars are of French manufacture, painted hazelnut. On the imperials or sides of the cars, each marked with the names of the most famous French regions, are fixed long rectangles of shaped and perforated duralumin sheet metal, the latest technical solution, it is said, against silting up in the desert. The members of the Equipes Militaire Française are young second lieutenants, captains, all in white summer uniforms, all almost clean-shaven. Équipe Militaire Française, they say as they introduce themselves. They say it impetuously, with the deliberate boldness customary in military schools, in the tone of someone about to order an assault with bayonet, in a ringing voice, evidently implying the drapeau, the immortal princes, the Napoleonic victories and the épopée Leclerc. They are the favorites in the race. None of the competitors are likely to have the experience the French have of desert motoring. Immediately after, the 3 Turinese Velliard, Pavasio and Butti, silent the first 2, talkative and full of fire the third. The 3 men from Turin take part in the race in an old jeep that they have fitted out as a giardinetta as best they can, so much so that the result is a kind of car that would be worthy of a retrospective automobile exhibition. On the imperial are coiled steel cables, picks, shovels, 2 wooden boxes painted yellow. "We thought it best to bring a couple of dynamite boxes," says Butti. We will use them to blow up any boulders that might block our way. Extraordinary form of foresight, worthy in every way of Jules Verne's fantasy of heroes. That the journey we are about to embark on through Africa may, after all, offer unforeseen thrills, including several of a road character, is more than certain. If only because at least a third of the route, i.e. around 5,000 kilometers, runs along simple desert or equatorial tracks barely marked by the passage of rare wheels. Here in Algiers, at the moment of finally stowing the load on board their jeep, the three Turinese realized that they had gradually accumulated exactly twice as much luggage as could be loaded. Above all, they found they had overstuffed themselves with clothes. Each of them had brought 4 or 5, plus 2 smokings and a tailcoat, plus a whole series of overalls, plus a whole host of colonial clothing items, enough to equip an expedition 4 times as large as theirs. Since this morning, the 3 of them have been throwing ballast around, discarding it reluctantly. 3 trunks of theirs will be leaving for Italy with the excess, with the rear of the car entirely occupied by luggage. Velia, Pavasio and Butty, all 3 of them together, have to make do with just the front seat. Space is so scarce that they are forced into very close elbow-to-elbow, or rather shoulder-to-shoulder contact. They will have to ask each other's permission before making the slightest movement, even to pull a cigarette out of their pocket. They will see the whole of Africa flowing through the windows, immobilized, locked as if in a straitjacket. Only if one of the 3 of them, in turn, will be able to lie down on the luggage with his legs curled up and be content with the thin strip of landscape visible through a crack, will the other 2 companions be able to move easily and not arrive at each stopover point shrunken. New arrivals, new buckets present a arm of spy lined up at the entrance gates. 3 young friends from Oran with an old Ford lorry, a low, long, brand new grand sport car driven by a gentleman in a black and white checked suit, a very small French Dyna Panhard 2-seater with an air-cooled engine, a large truck with aerials that will make the journey on behalf of the French radio, broadcasting news every evening. Then a small German car driven by 2 elderly Belgian ladies, the only all-female crew of the Rolly, then 2 twin Italian vehicles, the Lancia, Beta gleaming in silver and aluminium. On the front of the 2 cars are the names imposed for the occasion of the trip, Climany and Southern Cross. I follow the journey on board the Southern Cross, glimpsing through the windows my empty seat. Then another jeep, the Italian team of Count Lenardi, his sister and Mrs. Clara Padua. Then more and more, every few minutes I see the spy snapping to attention. There are about 40 competitors for the Mediterranean, Cape Town race trip, about 120 drivers, mechanics, passengers and journalists are those who will start tomorrow in groups of no more than 4 cars per day. Inside the halls of the Palais d'Été, a beautiful, kaleidoscopic sight. Under the Moorish vaults adorned with brightly colored arabesques, smokings, tailcoats, glittering women's dressing gowns, blue mechanics' overalls, sumptuous uniforms of spy impaled in the corners, white waiters' jackets, officers' uniforms mingle. The geranium red trousers of the plump and absorbed English contestant Davis stand out against the dazzling lemon yellow scarf of Joaquino Quaranta known as Sixillo, the rosettes and ribbons of the Legion of Honor, against the grease stains scattered on the blue overalls of the mechanics. The 2 Egyptians melancholically crunch pastries. In a nearby huddle they talk of fuel and octane. At the side of a brazier someone explains how the best measure of pressure for car tires when crossing the desert is exactly 3 kilos per square centimeter, the same pressure that is exerted on the sand by the paw of a normally laden camel. In every pastry there is a date, or a half date, or a quarter date. Even the air smells of dates. It is sweet. From under a glittering arch of mirrored tesserae, Joaquino Quaranta keeps his eyes peeled on the glittering dressing tables, on the bare shoulders of the ladies, on the huge table covered with hors d'oeuvres and grands vins d'Algeriet France. In one corner one hears loud laughter, talk of pygmy women. Pygmies are suspicious and quarrelsome, says one who seems to know a lot, especially quarrelsome. Shortly after, I hear laughter and catch a glimpse of the self-proclaimed pygmy connoisseur in the act of slapping the face of a supposedly bad pygmy, a slap that is directed downwards, towards the presumable height of a pygmy face. Slapping, says the voice, is the only way to get the pygmies to respect you. Woe betide you if you treat them well. What oil did you put in the gearbox? I hear him ask behind me. Quinine, Judges another, was fine in Livingstone's time. It takes more nowadays. Meanwhile, Joe Aquino Quaranta delicately sips some Grand Kebir 1935, which a waiter in white gloves offers him over a silver tray. At Metafa, recalls an old general, at the famous Battle of Metafa even the native soldiers had to fight standing up, so hot was the sand. They were dropping like flies, but better to die of blows than to roast on the sand. A thermometer embedded in the ground marked 70 degrees. Do you realize, gentlemen, what 70 degrees means? Last year, says a certain Gleisner, the only South African competitor, I came from Cape Town to Algiers in 17.5 days. Gleisner, who has the combined professions of representing a car company and guiding tourists around South Africa, claims to have invented an infallible device to disengage cars from sand and mud. So what is the device? He is asked. Gleisner regrets not being able to say. He is in the process of obtaining a patent. The car that this Gleisner will be driving on the trip, together with Mrs. Davis and another of his compatriots, bears the telltale signs of a formidable crash on the front. We then learn that a few days ago, during the journey from Le Havre to Marseille, a metal electricity pylon was run over by the car Gleisner was driving. It was caused by ice, it is said, but why then, one smiles, not also patent a device against skidding on ice. I am introduced to the American competitor Brush. Charles Brush III, says his business card. Brush rides in a Jeep station wagon equipped with a mosquito net that can wrap around and protect the whole car. Accompanying him is his wife, a pretty little woman with pretty Mongolian eyes. Brush, who works in electronic construction back home, is tall and blonde. He has a mythical appearance, a nascent reddish beard frames his rosy, teenage Nazarene face. A local newspaper has printed that the Brush family bought their famous mosquito net about 10 days ago, in India, and that the Brush family had gone to India to spend some time, having arrived in Algiers, by mistake, a month before their scheduled departure date. Mrs. Brush is now at pains to deny this. Do you really want, she says, that we were stupid enough to be a month off? Next to the Brush is another very long and extremely thin American. He speaks gesticulating like a Sicilian, and is at pains to explain how, instead of 4 blades, the radiator fan should have 6 blades. The secret of the desert, he rants, is all here, in these 2 extra blades. It is a simple wonderful secret. One cannot, by any means, get him to change the subject. Time wasted. 4 paces away from him, a confident tenor voice rings out, rolling its array. It is the voice of Fromentin, of the Radio Diffusion Française. Fromentin speaks as if he were perpetually holding the microphone in front of him, confident, his head firm and erect. Next to him speaks, a beautiful slow and clear French, the special correspondent of the Paris Monde, André Blanchot. Blanchot has a curious quirk, that of not letting a minute go by without wringing his hands, with the air of someone who is truly satisfied with himself and events. A funny quirk.
Many thanks for listening. Please subscribe and share this audiobook.